Hello, everybody, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and today I am interviewing my wonderful friend, Erin Thomas, where we have been collaborating about how do you talk about taking a script to the page, from the stage to the page, and vice versa, and why it matters. So Erin, I'm going to pause for just a second here. Here we are. From stage to page and back again, Erin and I have been talking about how you do that. And the more we talked about it, because she's a writer and I'm a speaker trainer, presentation skills trainer, we realized we had to do this in two parts. So Erin, why don't you give us a beginning? Take us to the next slide. Tell us about Maria.
So let's all imagine Maria is she's who we're going to envision. Let's say that she's in professional services. Let's say she's an estate planning attorney, focusing in wills and finances and that sort of thing. And say we read her article. And as we're going through the article, we feel like we're getting to know her. It's well written, it's well organized. We feel connected. And at the end, we feel really motivated to take action on whatever it is that Maria is teaching us. That's the sign of a good article. Maria's message has been delivered in a way that connects with her audience and inspires them to move forward, right?
So what if it's a speech?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So let's say that Maria, she's got this amazing article, and
let's say she started with a speech.
If she what?
Imagine that you're listening to her and she started with a speech.
Right.
She didn't start as an article. Yeah.
Right. So she's on the stage, and again, she's got this amazing message, and she's taking full advantage of her physicality on the stage. You can see her presence, her energy. You're captivated. You again feel like you're getting to know her. You're interested and engaged in what she's saying. And by the time she's done with her speech, again, you feel motivated to take action. So it's been a successful keynote.
And then what if it's the other way around? And this is where we started talking about this, Erin and I, because I don't know about you, but I have sat through so many speeches where, say it's Maria, the financial analyst, who and the attorney gives a speech that's full of data. And she puts up slides that are just lists and lists and lists and lists and lists. Takes you longer to read the slide than it does to hear it. That's deadly. What's the equivalent if you take your speech and make it directly into an article?
Exactly. So that it's exactly the same. We've all read those articles that feel very long-winded, very wordy and chatty. Sometimes they're peppered with so much jargon that we're confused, or they're lacking any sort of personal connection. So by the time we arrive to the end of the article, we are bored, we're uninspired, we feel meh about all of it. We certainly don't have that same captivated inspiration, motivation that same exact message had achieved when it was on the stage.
And this is why we are here today. I'd like to, before we go any further, let me introduce Erin officially. I've got her official bio. Erin Thomas is, and Erin, show us the bullet points about you. There we go.
I am.
All right. Erin Thomas is an acclaimed professional writer, sought after storyteller, creative messaging specialist, who has seen time and again the incredible power of compelling content. For the last 20 years, she's been working with entrepreneurs, business leaders, and individuals from around the world to elevate their ventures using bold, scroll-stopping messages that feel in perfect alignment with who they are, what they're doing, and why. Erin likes to refer to herself as a professional leaper. She's made it to her mission in life to take big leaps. And after earning a master's degree and landing the ad agency job she'd always wanted, it didn't take long to discover that that none of it felt right. So she changed her mind and changed her life. At that moment, she committed to building a magnificent existence that's authentically, unapologetically her, and helping others to do the same. Everyone should own their story. I love that, Erin. For Erin, it's a life full of faraway lands, powerful storytelling, deep connections, joyous music, big love, unbridled freedom, endless play, and giant slices of cake. You're in Germany. They do cake very well in Germany. Yeah, she's a native of Charleston, South Carolina, but she's currently living her dream expat lifestyle in Europe with her husband, daughter, a Boston Terrier, a French Bulldog, and 2 cats who think they own the place. They're probably right.
They are probably right.
Yes. So Erin, since we're starting out me interviewing you, and I should say to everybody that I'm going to interview her in a couple of weeks, how do we take a speech? How do we turn a speech into an article? Why does it matter? Why should we have an article as well as a speech?
Because it's important. If we're not leveraging all of the different mediums, we are leaving a lot on the table. We're leaving a lot of money, we're leaving a lot of impact, we're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. So if we can write a really good speech and deliver it well, but then it falls flat elsewhere when we try to publish it, or vice versa, we lose all of the point of our messaging. So it all comes, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and one of the things that I've learned in these last umpteen years of coaching is there are people who want to watch videos, there are people who want to listen to podcasts, and there are people who want to read the article. So you really need to address, that's why I'm saying, who's the audience?
Exactly.
You want to get people the way they want to consume your content. The important part is to have them consume your content.
Well, and chances are you have audience, even if you're a very niche, in a very niche industry, you have audience in all of those buckets. Ones that are visual, ones that are read, ones that listen. It's all, so it's really important that you be able to maybe not create in all mediums, but recognize the differences and be able to take steps towards capitalizing on all of them. Maybe that means outsourcing. Maybe that means taking a course. Maybe that means, but recognizing that there's a big difference in how you structure a speech and how you would then turn it into an article.
So why is the audience important?
Well, when you're giving a speech, you're in front of a very finite, you might be in front of 500 people, you might be in front of 25, but they've chosen to be there, chances are. So they're familiar with either your work, or if you're part of a panel, they're familiar with the idea that you're talking about. So you have a little more freedom to use some jargon. You're also relying on your body to help you convey and fill any gaps that you might have. But when you publish something, it's going out into the stratosphere, right? And so all of a sudden, yes, some people that are familiar with your work are obviously reading it, but there's a lot of people who aren't. And that's part of the goal, is to get them familiar with your work, to get them engaged in what you're doing.
And choosing who you're writing for also, I would think. Certainly, rule number 1 in speaking is make it about, decide who your audience is, and then use strategic empathy. That's my signature technique of strategic empathy to put yourself in their shoes and address what they're looking for. I'm guessing you do that in an article too.
You do. And you have to put yourself in their shoes. That's exactly how empathy is key, because you have to know not only who they are, but what do they want? What can you bring them that they need, that they will benefit from? How can you paint the picture for them through words that give them this? So by being able to step into their shoes, that's the key. You have to write too, as if you are speaking to a friend. You have to speak that it's, you know how you hear the old adage, you always want to talk to the lowest common denominator. Well, and that I don't agree with that, but you do have to speak as if you don't need to church it up. You don't need to go over the top. You need to connect. You need to speak in a way that connects with your audience the way you would a friend, right?
Yes. And thank you, Gisela, for that comment about write as if you're speaking to a friend. Very good. Why do you need to structure? And actually, let me go back and ask you, you talked about articles that are chatty and wordy and overblown. I always thought that any publication would not allow sloppy writing to be published.
I think that's a common, and I think that used to be the case, but I'm going to let everyone in on a little secret. You can pay to publish now. So a lot of times what you're reading, where it used to be like, wow, this was picked up by a publisher, or wow, there are plenty of platforms now that you just pay enough and you have free reign. So very important to note, and kind of disheartening sometimes.
You're buying that influence. Okay, so why is a structure important?
Well, this is something, you and I, Elizabeth, have talked a lot about this because it's such an overlap with speaking and writing. A lot of people, I think, push back against structure. They think it's restrictive. It's like a container. It prevents the creative flow.
Especially
it's actually
with speaking. Speakers really feel that, yes.
Yes, but what happens is it actually is the opposite, in that it gives you the freedom to really land your message. No, you don't need a very tight, constrictive structure, but you have to have somewhat of a framework to have the flow to be able to achieve your message, for it to land correctly.
Then these are the various bits of structure that we want to use for an article. Can you take us through what these are?
So any basic article, doesn't even have to be basic, any article should follow roughly this structure that just gives us a loose guideline. First, you've got the headline. You've got less than 3 seconds to capture the attention of your audience. So it's really important to use these few words and to take time to choose your words wisely to really hook your audience and get them invested in what you're doing. The tagline, again, you've got like 3 more seconds to convince them to stay. So this normally is a tiny little preview of what's to come, but it gives us the opportunity. It's just an extra opportunity as a writer. Sometimes it's overlooked, but there's no need for it to be. Then we've got our intro with preview. So with an article, this is giving people an idea of what's coming. This is just it doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It's just previewing and setting the stage. When we were in grade school and we're all learning to write papers, and you finish your intro with and now we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
It's very similar. because it allows the reader, or on stage, the audience, to be like, okay, I'm getting in the headspace. I know what's coming. I'm ready.
Yes.
Then
And
you've got
it tells
body.
you whether you want to read further too.
Absolutely. So
if you think
it's
about
important.
Anybody who clicked on this to watch us, you probably saw an article that would be with words in it, a photo with words in it. That would be the headline.
Headline. Yep.
Yep. And then underneath, there's a little bit written down, which would be a combination of the tagline and the intro with preview.
Exactly. So people know, oh, that's something that I'm interested in learning more about. I need to go click and explore it further. So in an article, it's to keep reading, or in this case, it was to tune in.
Okay.
Then you move into the meat and potatoes of your message, which is the body and the sub headlines. These go together. So essentially, your sub headlines are just areas throughout your copy as it goes on to break up that wall of words. No one wants to just turn to a page and it's nothing but black and white. It's overwhelming. It's not aesthetically pleasing, and it doesn't feel organized. It feels heavy. So
that's why we have punctuation. That's
right?
why we have paragraphs. Yes.
It is. And when I work with newish writers, when we talk about punctuation, the comma is the equivalent of a breath. If you would stop and take a breath, you need something there. But again, so in a written format, these sub headlines give folks a place to rest in between your topics. You have already set them up in the intro so they know what to expect, so they can tell, okay, I'm in the first section, I'm in the second section. And I'm sure next time when we get into speaking, it's going to be really similar there, yes, how you delineate, because you won't just get up there and read a wall of words. That the sub headlines turn into tools speaking.
It's also a way of, like you said, letting your brain rest. It's a way of letting people process an idea before you're going to take them on to the next. I've certainly heard people in conversation who tell stories, and they're just talking along, and then they're talking about the other thing that they thought of, and then there's this other thing they thought of, and then there's this other thing that they thought of, and you go, wait a minute, Maria, I thought you were telling me about why I should make a trust and why I should write a will, but now you're talking about something else. That's where did the conversation go?
Exactly. So if Maria was writing this article, maybe she's going to talk about the benefits of a living will, a regular will, and having a trust. So if those are her three areas, as the reader, we don't want her bouncing between all of them, because then by the time we slide into home base, we have no clue which one fit our needs, which one is best. We don't know what to do with her message. So by her telling us this is what we're talking about, these three things, and then using subheadlines and keeping the structure, now she has freedom to really drive her message home, right?
And freedom within the structure. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I can understand the conclusion and the contact info. Are there, when you get to the body of the article, do you have, again, the body of the article and the body of the speech? How would you help Maria take her speech about the need to make a will and set up a living trust? How would she shape that when she's creating the body of the article?
So the body of the article is like I said, it's the crux of the whole message. So the one area that really needs to have attention is building that connection. Sometimes that can happen easier, maybe with a speech, because you're there. People can see your facial expressions. They can see your physicality. There's a lot more interaction. So with the body of an article or anything published, you have to use words to build that connection. So that's one thing that's really important. You do that by incorporating storytelling elements.
So now we're getting into dressing up our structure.
Yes, and that's coming. So that's where we're going. Again, you have to be mindful of your audience. You want to write you're tailoring it to your audience, not to yourself. You're writing for your audience, not for the author. So that's a piece. And the last thing really is clarity. My big thing that I preach to all clients, clarity is kindness. We don't want our readers or our listeners to have to read between the lines or to pick up implications. We want to be very clear, concise, direct, and people will appreciate that. So it's combining those three things that help us not only establish connection, but build up that know, like, trust factor.
So one of the comments that came in advance was how the structure is different between a speech and an article. And my thought is it's pretty much the same, similar structure. It's what you do with it.
It is.
Yeah. So
I couldn't agree more.
How could we dress it up?
Perfect. Let's go over and there we go. So I think a great way to think of this, we all have, if we think of a mannequin, just a naked mannequin, and it's the same way that, we all wear clothes every day. But we're not all wearing blue jeans and black t-shirts, right? We use the way we dress as a way to connect, a way to express ourselves, a way to attract our people. It's very important how we dress it up. So even though we're all doing the same thing by wearing clothes, it's what we do with it that matters. And that's exactly what you're saying. With the structure can be the same, but the approach and what you do within the structure is very different.
Okay. Can you choose one piece to elaborate on? I know I could keep you here for the next 2 hours talking about all of these. Which one would you say is the most important?
I think probably connection and stories are definitely at the top of the list, because I think if an audience, a reader, feels like they know you, like they can trust you, like you get it, like you've been there, like oh my gosh, you're in my head. When they have these feelings, they're most receptive to receiving our message. So I think there's a big need to incorporate that into any writing, regardless of your message. Now, I'm not talking about technical textbooks or anything like that, but we're talking about articles and trying to convey our message to the general public. And so I think obviously tailored to your niche, but providing that level of human really elevates the reception.
I love that. Sally has been listening here and talking about, thank you, Sally. You've been commenting all along. This is wonderful. Repeating what we've said. Thank you. That helps. How can you best talk more about how you can connect to the audience in words?
Well, and that's, I think, one of the trickiest things when you're on stage and you can rely so much on just your presence.
Yes.
So you have to get real creative when you have to then bridge that gap of physicality and emotion and the live time feedback, because that's something else that can come that you don't have in an article. You don't know if your message is landing. You don't know if they're dropping off. You don't know when to pivot. So I think using words creatively I prefer starting everything with a story to help
Okay.
with the visual. So the way this conversation began with Maria and introducing Maria to our audience, right out of the box, they get an idea of who Maria is and what she's doing and the difference between her messages. So I think leading with connection and leading with story, and getting descriptive.
And one thing I must say is beware of cultural references that not everybody will get. You're an American from South Carolina living in Germany right now. I'm an American living partly in Portland, Oregon, and partly in Austria. The culture, and we're both talking to people around the world for whom
Right.
English is not their first language. Do you have any suggestions for ways of telling stories and metaphors that everybody will get, no matter where they grew up?
Well, I think staying away from colloquialisms and being very aware of slang and things that are very regional. I think there's not really, I mean, there's a place for it maybe in social media, but I think you have to be very aware of the words you're using.
Earlier, you said you don't have to church it up. And one of our
Correct.
listeners commented, what does church it up mean?
Oh, perfect example. There you go. So it's a perfect example of a phrase that is inherently American and an example of how you can sometimes miss an opportunity there. So when I say church it up, it just means make it more complicated or fancy than it needs to be.
Okay. I thought you were talking about Southern American preachers.
Oh,
Singing
no,
hallelujah. So you think so? Church it up means to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
It is, or to make it fancier or more advanced, or to sound bigger, better than it is. I think it goes back.
I think that's a regional. That's part of your part of the U.S. where you heard that.
It could be. It's always, I think, tied to getting dressed up on Sundays, and a lot of people, that's kind of a passing or maybe a bygone era by now, because I know that there's a lot of different kinds of churches, but in years past, you always got on your best clothes. That was your fancy day. And so I think that's probably where that came from, but that's good I never really thought of it being.
I never knew that. Okay, thank you. Okay. So there's an example of this. Then if Maria were to come to you, let's move to the next slide and talk about how could she start from transcript to article?
So the first thing we would talk about is I would want to get to know Maria, to know her personality, to know what parts she thinks resonates with her audience in person. Is she animated and charismatic and energetic when she speaks, and that's what they're resonating? So we need to build in some volume and some energy. Maybe she's more reserved and more people relate to her calmness and her demure demeanor. And so then we can approach from that way. I would want to know which stories she incorporates into her speech, so that we can then use them to launch into the article, to build up the ramp. Because I think that's, every article has this arc. And so going up the ramp is when we're building connection. At the top is when we're doing all of our messaging. And then with our conclusion, we're bringing it full circle, inspiring our audience and reminding them of why they connected with us in the first place.
Yes.
So we are essentially dressing ourselves. The article needs to be an expression of the author. What makes this different than another estate planner, another attorney, you know,
Mhm.
what in a sea of publications, what is it about Maria and Maria's message that is going to connect? And that's the key, I think, to anybody doing their messaging. We want to show why we are the ones to help.
I love that. And especially painting the picture. I know you've spoken about the elegance of language, and this will be the last thing I ask you. But one of the things that authors can do is pay attention to choices of words. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think it goes back to choosing your words wisely based on your audience, and using words that really illustrate. Don't gloss over things. Don't rush through. That really take the time to fill in those gaps that are now missing from the stage, that were just inherently there. They weren't written into the speech, but they were just there. So now your challenge, your opportunity is to choose your words to fill those gaps, which is key.
Yeah. And of course, the words you choose for an article that's going to be an article that Michael Jackson is still alive and living with Princess Diana, and it's going to be in one of those tabloids in the supermarket by the supermarket checkout counter. That's not the language you would use for, say, the London Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal.
Absolutely. I think it's important to think with written communication, you only have a finite amount of time to handle all these things we've talked about. So you have to choose your words very wisely. And like you said, it's going to be very different if you're writing for those two very different publications. Yeah. So really taking that time to choose correctly, and making the most out of your time that you have with your reader. Because if you lose them, they don't reach the end. You know, sometimes with a speech, if it's a terrible speech, you're still stuck there till the end. With an article, you know, in a magazine or in a publication, you simply close it. Yeah. So you're really taxed with that added layer of engagement and keeping them till the end. Yes. So word choice matters. Empathy matters.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Erin. We will be back in a couple of weeks. Check both our social media feeds for announcements of how you can hear, if you've written an article, how do you turn it into a speech? One thing I will say is you need to have outside eyes read your material. You need to have somebody who knows what they're doing to give you informed feedback. Feedback is fine, but it might just be, wow, you wrote an article. I would never get around to doing that. Good for you. You want feedback from someone who knows what they're doing, which is why I asked Erin to join us today. Erin, how can they find out more from you?
Well, I am, my website is very easy. It's ErinThomasCommunications.com. I am Erin Thomas Comms, COMMS, on all social media. I would be happy to connect with anyone. I'm always up for talking about messaging and ways we can elevate it into scroll stopping content, because that's
okay.
That's
stop
my goal.
them from scrolling past your content. Exactly.
Yeah, you want them to feel something.
All right. We will post links in the comments below after this. And in the meantime, Erin Thomas, thank you so much for having joined us. Gisela, thank you for monitoring and giving us your comments. And thank you to all of those of you who are listening, and tune in for the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. See you soon.
Okay. Okay, we are no longer on, stop the recording.